Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. So far for news in EVE Online, it's been a pretty light week again, although the CSM minutes did just drop. I haven't gone through them at this point myself. I did take like a quick glance at the first Reddit thread about the CSM minutes, and something that was noted a couple of times is like the lack of news or a roadmap or plans or anything like that. Honestly, I think even if that was discussed, it would not find its way in the roadmap that will be under NDA, and I think that it's EVE Vegas where CCP is planning to announce stuff for the development of the game at this point. With no FanFest this year, it's basically the biggest meeting. We've got a huge list of devs that are going over there, so I think we'll get some real keynotes, we'll get some information on what's going to happen. One thing that I think we can sort of agree on is that it's not looking good for the Alliance tournament. The situation described in the CSM minutes is that the community team would like to see it come back, but without significant development of tools and things like that, it's going to be very hard to do. So that seems like it's something that may not be happening next year, at least from this CSM minute perspective. We'll see, of course, what's going to come next. Let's start with a look at the New Eden store here, where we have yet another new skin, if I'm not mistaken. So we have crown and sword skins. So those are, I mean, look pretty good on, for instance, the Confessor here. Crown and sword skin. Same thing on the battleships. They do look pretty nice. I really like the black, then the red, and then the gold at the back there. Really cool. But it must also be said that this is like the second or even the third new skin in as many weeks. Does feel like they're pushing them out a little bit fast at this point. However, there is something to note, of course, is that this is all around the Imperial celebrations, the MR celebrations, so it does make sense just from an in-game lore perspective here. You just have to be a little careful with I think optics when coming out with too many new skins in too short a period of time. I'm pretty sure that some of you guys know about the store mount debacle from Blizzard as well. Just coming out with so many paid mounts too quickly just didn't jive well with the player base. You gotta be careful with the optics for skins as well, although these make sense just from an in-game lore perspective as well. So let's give them a pass, and yeah, as I've said, I'm looking forward to EVE Vegas for deciding on where CCP is going, where EVE Online is going, and perhaps making more plans for the game. Next up, we'll take a look at the market, of course. That's why we are mostly here. And let's start with some plex and stuff coming in at 3.5. Well, let's make it 3.10. We'll get there before we get started on that. And we see that, let's take a look at the chart first. Plex is going down again. I think that it is because of a sale. There was a pretty big sale on Steam. I think that that's what's causing the pressure, and we can see that the chart is playing with 3.5 million. Now in GTA itself, we're very quickly going back up to 3,750,000 for the sellers. The buyers though are staying below 3.5 million, so there's some moves being made at the moment. If we go for the player-owned trade hubs though, a bit above, or well, a bit below 3.6 million for the sellers, and then the buyers are stick around the same place, just below 3.5 million. So a bit of pressure on Plex prices. If I'm not mistaken, it will be because of the Steam sale that allowed you, I think, to grab some cheap game time, not necessarily Plex. I haven't gone through all the packages that were on sale there, but yeah, a pretty nice decline actually, bringing it back to 3.5 million, which from the looks of this one-year chart is actually like a reasonable price for Plex itself. Of course, the low points here at around 3.25 million, that's where you really, I think, want to have bought, because as I've said, if hype comes back a little bit for the game, and now that summer is over, we should see player activity rise again. That should mean more demand and thus increased prices, inflation coming back to the game. All of that should have an upwards impact on the price of Plex, and so these two dips here, these two bottoms, that double bottom here is probably going to be the best time to have bought plex. You can still do so though, right? If you manage to grab below 3.5 million, that's a pretty nice price point, I think, to get started on, especially if you look at what the sell price in JITA itself is already above 3.7 million. That would be a nice starting point as well. Not the very best, but still pretty damn good. So we could take advantage of this little slump right here, which I think was due to a plex, or due to a sale, I should say, not necessarily a plex sale itself, but a sale from CCP on Steam. Next up, we have the multiple pilot trading certificates. You can see that one went up to 1.5 billion, back under pressure a little bit as well, and basically flat on the 20-day moving average for the last month or so. We're still below 1.5 billion for the sellers, and the buyers are coming in at 1.4 billion. That gap, I think, is slowly closing, but for now, we are still buying multiple pilot trading certificates decently below 1.5 billion, which is quite a ways away from the 2 billion top that we saw here in May as well. Next up, the skill extractors. We can see that same hesitation, although it's not like same thing with plex. One thing to note, this is not like just a very specific sale that increases the volumes. It's just a little bit of pressure, I think, coming from that Steam sale, and so now getting close and closer to 400 million ISK again on that pressure. It's just above 401 million for the sellers and 393 for the buyers, though that margin is closing, and I think that that means that buyers are slowly being forced up in price here in the skill extractors already. As inflation takes hold again, I think with the end of the blackout we will see more ISK flowing in the economy, and that will at some point give the sellers some breathing room as well, and I think that we'll start to see an upwards movement pretty soon in all of these goods. Next up, the skill injectors. Here are the large skill injectors, and we get a little bit of bounce off of 800 million ISK. And here, even the skill extractor plex decline has not really shown up in what's happening here. Sideways movement basically over the last week. We are selling them for 822 million, at least a couple of them that are not nearby. And then it's 827 million already in the player-owned trade hubs. Take a quick look, it's 848 in JITA 4.4. Yeah, that's a significant margin, and that's a significant upwards pressure to be seen there as well. While, and this is what I think really important, the buyers are competing very heavily towards 800 million already. Once the first one comes in with a decent volume, I think that's gonna be the trigger for the market to say, okay, we're back, and we need those prices will start to go back up. Once here the 800 million is gone, you can see that the margin is just drying up very quickly. Once that happens, I think sellers will sigh in relief, as you know, players will see, all right, that's not that much difference anymore. We're gonna just start grabbing stuff straight from the sellers, and that will eventually increase the margins again. But I am seeing that upwards pressure, especially considering how far ahead JITA is already moving at this point. Next up, we still have the small skill injectors that are also basically flat with today a daily average that's going back up in price. Let's take a look at that. 165 million for the sellers, but again 159 for the buyers, and these are again competing with each other more and more, even in JITA and in the player-owned trade hubs. And then if we go for the JITA prices, it's up to 170 million pretty much. Not as big a jump as for the large scale injectors, but clearly that pattern is materializing again. The buyers are driven up to a price point where once they are forced above that, which I think can happen pretty soon, we will see prices go back up. And then finally we have the daily alpha injectors that are actually under pressure again. Although this is weird, just 3 days ago, 4 days ago, we get average price of 58 million ISK, and now it's below 50 million here again in the last couple of days. So do we have that margin? No. 53 million now for the sellers, 46 million for the buyers. In JITA it is still at 53 million. So this is completely different, very high competition for this one, and actually a decline in price for the daily alpha injectors with more supply coming in. Here my theory is again going to be that sale on Steam. Perhaps some daily injectors make a part of one of the packs that came on sale, and thus driving supply up and driving the price of the sellers down from, well, right here we went up to 58 million pretty much, and now it's already back down to 53 million. So I think here the daily alpha injectors will have been impacted by the sale as well. Let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, but that's my read on this, because we do see a slight volume bump as well, so I think that makes the most sense. Next up, we move on to the minerals. They are coming in at 10 minutes. Like that, and you may already have seen from the ticker that in the mineral market we've got pressure coming back, of course. So let's start here with titanium, that is clearly moving away from the nice 7 ISK price range and is now fighting to maintain a 6.5. So far it's been successful. The sellers, let's go 4G, the prices are still at 6.7 ISK, buyers are at 6.4, so it's decent, but it's only one big buyer at 6.4, then it's 6.35, and then very quickly we go down to less than 6.3. So if this keeps up, and the volumes here are quite significant, 700 million units, 300 million units, all of that makes for quite a few titanium on the market, a bit too much for the market right now. And of course, with 0.0 back in Nulsec, there is an increased safety again for Rorcal mining. As a result, I think that yeah, we'll continue to see pressure for the minerals for now. Oh, talking about the Nulsec local, there are still some problems with chat. You can clearly see here you bring Solo back, and in Eve Radio that we had some connection problems. Let's hope that they get back to being active, but yeah, it's still like pretty empty in there, and hope also that it doesn't have an impact on the market window. Because well, I want to make my Eve talk. Let's move on to pyrite next, with a surprise increase in price back to 5 ISK. That's actually very welcome news. I would say that we don't see the pressure coming in across the board. 483 for the first seller, most of them though 494, 496, getting very close to that 5 ISK. Volume's not that high. We do have 200 million here, 159 million here, but across the board this doesn't feel like it's an outrageous amount of pyrite on the market. And buyers up to 476, that's quite significant as well. They are being forced closer and closer to 5 ISK as well, so a counter move to my expectation. Pyrite actually up a little bit towards, well, 5 ISK. Consider that on the 1-year chart is pretty close to a high point, definitely trading above average. Some good news, that's always welcome. Next up we got Mexelon. That is not good news if you like to mine Mexelon. That is continuing on the decline. 1-year low point getting close to 40 ISK at this point, I think. 41.52 for the sellers and 38.55 for the buyers. 40 is right in the middle of that. Volumes here are definitely declining, 20 million, 40 million. That's not that much anymore. And yeah, I still think my theory holds so far, that we are seeing a switch to some moon mining as well, which allows larger entities with lots of moons potentially to fine-tune the mix to their own needs. And as a result, Mexelon, which was a bottleneck mineral in 0.0, is losing that status of being special, and is thus declining in price, because demand for high-sec Mexelon is probably just going back down. This is something that, if you're very new to the game, you may not know this, but 65 ISK for Mexelon is actually a price that that has been a normal price for like many years, whereas titanium at 7 ISK also, but titanium at 4.5 was actually super low, and pyrite, for instance, has lost a lot of its value. It used to be worth like twice, maybe even 3 times what titanium was. But CCP at one point decided to rebalance the ore compositions, so the minerals that are in the different ores in Nulsec, in order to make them more self-reliable. And then of course they also came with moon mining, with the buff to the Rorcals and the Orcas, and as a result, across the board, most minerals lost a lot of their value just because of the massive amounts that were available in the game, all of a sudden crushing prices of Tech 1 ships in the process. There was one exception, and that is this one, Mexelon. 60-70 ISK for Mexelon, even 5-6 years ago I think was a normal price, and that is now finally not happening anymore. And I think the reason is it had this special status of being the one mineral in need in Nulsec. No matter what they mined there locally, they would always lack in Mexelon, and so we could still come on a nice price even from high-sec for that. That I think with now moon mining being more established is starting to yeah, to weigh on the price of Mixelon, and now it's at a 1-year low point. After that we have Isogen, which is one of the minerals that actually suffered the most from all of the changes. This used to be far more expensive than Mixelon. Look at that, crashing down to the 15-16 ISK range for most of the year, and here at the tail end we've got some pressure again. 15 ISK it is, 15.21 for the first seller, 15.50 we're getting there for some of them, and then the buyers are at 14.56, so very narrow margin, but they're trying to grab Isogen below 15 ISK, which is very cheap, of course. Then we have Noxium. In the last couple of weeks that one has been suffering as well. And to keep that perspective going here, 300 ISK may look pretty damn juicy on this chart. Noxium used to be worth like 1100 ISK, 1250 on a good day. So this is also one of the minerals that has lost a lot of its value because of changes to the game over the last few years. And now here at the tail end, well, there is also something special about Noxium, because just like Mixelon and unlike Tritanium, you can see the decline here at the tail end. And for Pyrite, well, that was kind of terrible. We're getting in a weird place on the yearly cycles here, but Noxium has actually done really well to maintain 300 ISK over the last year or so, and is now also losing that value here. 236 for the sellers, 221 for the buyers, 1-year low point. Yeah, the two strongest performance, I would say, in the last 2 years or so, that have basically weathered the moon mining storm the best, are now just drastically dropping in value. And again, my theory is because of moon mining, you're able to just put more Noxium in your mix if you need it. Same with Mixelon. So as a result here, another sharp decline in price, despite the fact that, for instance, Pyrite is trying to hold on to a decent price compared to the 1-year chart. Next up, we still have Zydrine and Megasite, the former Nullsic special minerals. These are now also available in HiSec, of course, through moon mining. And this one is holding on to a price above 450, 456, and then 470 for most sellers actually, and then 456 for the buyers. That is, well, not that bad a performance here again on this 1-year chart, holding on to 500 for most of it, bouncing back down to 450, but able to maintain that price. So decently stable here. Same thing, moon mining is probably having a big impact on what's happening there. You can see the volumes: 2.4 million, 7.7 million, 2.3 million. These are volumes that a corporation grabs from one or a couple of moons in 0.5 systems at the moment, and that's what's happening right now. You just bring that to the market, try to sell it at a best price, as you've got a lot more supply, a lot more competition on the supply side as well, as you've got a much narrower margin. What used to happen when Zydrine and Megasite was not available in HiSec at all, well, you had importers from 0.0 that would bring it in, and they would dictate the price very much because they were the only source of Zydrine in Jita, for instance. And as a result, you had a chart that was really close to the actual sell price that was asked for by those importers, and you had buy prices that had much bigger margins because they just wanted to be lucky on some people that were lazy and wanted to get rid of Zydrine right away. Also a massive difference in volumes. Volumes from the sellers would be much bigger because you'd of course need to do trips with big ships in order to bring that in on the market, and so they tended to pay big volumes of Zydrine and Megasite to the market, sell it all at the best possible price, and you would have much lower volumes in the buyers of Zydrine, because that was more opportunistic picking on lazy people that just wanted to get rid of some stuff in the trade hub or around the trade hub. And now you can see that's much more in line. 2 million here, 2 million, 3 million, 2.6 million. Yeah, these are the volumes that even a small corporation or a small transport ship can just grab, bring, sell, etc. A complete change in dynamic as well, which has cost a lot of value to Zydrine, but also has brought, well, basically a bit more competition to the market. Next up, we've got Megasite as well. That's doing even worse than Zydrine. Tried to hold on to 450 for the first half of the year, just went through that, then trying to hold on to 400. We broke that, and right now we are selling for 391 on the first few sellers. Then it's 410, so we could go back up a little bit in price in the upcoming days if supplies don't make it here. But then 391 for the buyers. Yeah, that's just some impatient sellers, which is something that you would have never seen before the changes to minerals. before moon mining, because you knew that you would be able to dictate that price as a seller. So we're going 410 for most sellers, 391 for the buyers, and around 400 ISK for megasite in general. And then there is still one very special mineral. Here is morphite, 1 year high point. This is even historically speaking a real high point, 13,500 ISK probably. If you look at this chart, it's 13,200 for the sellers, 12,780 for the buyers. But this is very unique. I don't think you can grab it from moons, at least not in 0.5 systems. So far I haven't really seen that in the mix, and it is tied to the Tech 2 economy rather than the Tech 1 economy. So a very special one that we could have made an amazing trade over the last half year. Buy here in May for 7,500 ISK and now sell for 13k. That was a very nice trade to make. Unfortunately, I didn't do that. And the reason for that, I often actually get caught in that trap, is we have this slow burn down here, and when you start to see charts that for like 8-9 months have just gone slowly down and down and down, it always feels more and more risky, where it actually isn't, to grab stuff at those at the bottoms that form from time to time. There's always a barrier that becomes quite recognizable, and here, for instance, for morphite, it was very obviously 7,500 ISK here. Look at that. The price gets there, volume increase, jumps back to 8k, we go back down here again, volumes come back, and now all of a sudden we're off to the races in 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 4 steps here, up to 13,000 ISK. That is, yeah, a very nice move, and showing that stuff like this can still happen. You still have potentially amazing trades that you can make even in the mineral market, although as I've said, morphite is a bit different from most of the others. Next up, we have the PI market coming in at 21 minutes. We'll go over these. As I've said, my expectation over the summer was that we would see decreased prices on decreased activity. There was a special event from CCP where you could just log in, kill a couple rats, get extra skill points. I think that kept activity not necessarily high in the amount of time played in the game, but for PI, it's also something that you do when you log in, activate your extractors, then maybe once a week or even once a month, you grab your stuff and you bring it to the market. Very passive. And I think that's basically kept the PI activities across the game more alive than I thought it would. And so now here in September, we have to take a look at, well, are we continuing the decline, or is there a sign that we're going back up? I would say if PI starts to go back up, that should also indicate an increase in activity again in the game, which, well, it's something to look for, of course, at the moment with the impact of the Gnostic blackout. Clearly a decline in the later part of the summer, in my opinion, in just general activities. So let's take a look at this broadcast notes. You can see 20-day moving average clearly still declining here, 1.85 million average. You could say 2 million for this good. It's now 1.9 million for the sellers and 1.84 million for the buyers. This is obviously a pretty damn low price and an opportunity to stock up on some cheap broadcast nodes. How long will it last? Again, that's very difficult to say, of course, at the moment, because we are definitely after a unique summer of chaos. So yeah, let's see how this evolves. But you can now grab just from the sellers some broadcast nodes for less than 1.9 million. Average price is easily 2 million. Spikes up to 2.2 million are possible as well. So here, if for instance a new structure would be announced, this would be a massively good investment potentially. You always have to be a little careful with what you say with predictions, of course. Next up, we have the construction blocks, and here we had a nice decline mid-September to 10,000 ISK on the average price. That was a nice buy opportunity, but we are already moving back up with the 5-day moving average. And look at this daily average here, going up to 12k. So we're talking 11,800 for the sellers, 10,300 for the buyers, and basically, yeah, sellers have been able to go up in price, buyers just a little bit above 10,000 ISK, but at least some margin. We're back close to just below, I would say. Well, actually, no, with the sellers, we're back on an average price for construction blocks already. Very interesting, just a very short window of about 10 days, early September, to actually grab some cheap ones. Next up, we have the consumer electronics. Again, the September decline, right? The July-August killing spree has done really well to maintain a decent price range. Then we do have that September decline. So here we could have bought for probably less than 11,000 ISK, maybe 10.5 or something like that. Sellers 12,700, buyers back at 11,000 discs. So we can clearly see that there's already an increased activity, at least in the PI, that I'm starting to spot here. We're not yet at the average price, but 12,700, try to find that on the chart, is definitely back on that average range for the sellers at least. So give it a little bit of time. It's already evolving in the right direction for higher prices. And as a result, yeah, the buy opportunity will probably have been a very narrow window early September so far. Next up here we've got coolants. Coolants is a little bit different. It is tied to fuels that tends to have much more stable demand and is actually currently trying to trade around 13,000 disc. It's 12,800 for the sellers and 11,300 for the buyers. What's noticeable here, 11,300 for the buyers, around average, sellers just above average. A decent margin between the two, so there is definitely some room for the prices to move, but I think that the upwards movements are going to start soon. Erythrium, also tied to fuels, actually managed a 1-year high point in September, is now going back to a more average price, 15,600 for the sellers and 13,600 for the buyers. Again, decent margin, 2,000 disc on this is not that bad of a margin, but we're staying at around average for, or even a touch above average for another fuel related PI material. Then integrity response drones, so the advanced ones are mostly tied to bigger constructions like structures, for instance. And here we do see that summer slump and especially that September slump. Look at these daily average, well below 2.2 million here all of a sudden. Average should be between maybe 2.4, something like that. We're currently selling for 2.2 million, at least the first one, and then the buyers are below 2.2 million. Most coming in though at 2.3. Definitely trading below average yet again. If you think that CCP will come out with a structure, for instance, at eVegas, I still think that there is a chance that CCP will do something about 0.0 local and tie that to a structure. At least some of the comments after the Nullsec blackout indicate that they can't bring the hatchet to something. They need the scalpel for changing how local works in 0.0, and maybe a structure is definitely something that people have often said that could be something that would allow people that have own space to basically build that up. They need to make an investment in order to get all of that intel, but at least they have a way to get it. And so as a result, it is, I think, a gamble that you might want to consider. Integrity response drones trading well below average. Next up, mechanical parts. This is actually an unusual one because it is tied to fuels. I would have thought that 11k would be defendable, but no. Mid-August we start that decline again, bottom price of like around 9,000 disc in the first part of September for sure. Bit of a jump here in the 5-day moving average, but we're still talking 10,600 for the sellers and 9,150 for the buyers. This is obviously still well below average, especially those buyers close to 9,000 disc is pretty much below the entire chart, so you still have a buy opportunity in mechanical parts. Your potential trade is pretty easily 9,000 to 13,000 disc, so that's a pretty nice margin. Probably 40% should be possible on this one. Definitely, I think, worth a buy gamble at least. Next up, we have the nuclear reactors. That one is very interesting that we do see an increased price here in September and finally a decline as well. But what's worrying, of course, is the lack of complete volumes in the trade. So this is just, sometimes a couple people buy a few of these and we have 90k. Sometimes some sales do go through and then we get 110k. And that's basically what's happening here. You can see this market is practically non-existent. Buyers are trying to grab it at 85,000 disc. Sellers trying to get rid of it at 100,000 disc. It's a healthy margin between the two, but you're just never really gonna trigger. So what tends to happen is probably someone says, all right, I may need some nuclear reactors. Let's put up a buy order for 90,000 disc right here. So that's these sales here. When those do finally trigger, and then sometimes people come in, all right, let's try to sell at least a couple here for just shy of 100,000 disc. That's what you get here, 98.5. So all right, that's probably a sell or that gets picked up. This used to be an amazing product with massive volatility actually and decent volumes. You could make really good trades on this. It's completely dried up. The nuclear reactor market is practically decimated. We'd like to see a comeback. If this manages to make a comeback, then that should really mean more activity in the game. Organic mortar applicators, a surprise summer strong performance at around 1.2 million. Then we again have that September decline to less than 1 million, and sellers are at a million, buyers at 9.5 million. So we're already working our way back from the bottom, and the market has spotted that bottom. Look at that volume here. There's definitely people ready to cash their chips on organic mortar applicators if CCP does announce a structure. Robotics next, also a little bit mirroring mechanical parts for being a PI material tied to fuels, going for that 1-year low point of around 90,000 discs just a couple days ago, and we're still buying below that price range. Sellers in fact at 92,000. Clearly we are oversupplied, we're trading at a low point, and again here for the potential, this looks very nice, but it's actually pretty limited. 90 to 110,000 disc is not as good as your mechanical parts potential, I think, but it is pretty obvious that robotics is massively oversupplied right now, and that you can grab it for less than 90,000 disc is below the entire chart, so that is definitely not a bad buy. Self-harmonizing power cores, advanced PI again, going for around 2 million, which is not that bad actually. 2 million for the sellers and just shy of 2 million for the buyers, so super narrow margin at a bit below average, but that's not what I would call an opportunity. What could be noticed is you do have an increased price in August, and then you have again that September, first half of September, massive decline all of a sudden in a lot of the PI materials. Superconductors, also a September low point here. Again, we're slightly recovering from that. Let's take a look at where the sellers are at. 11,700. Okay, trying to get back to a more average price for the sellers. Buyers still lagging behind a little bit at 9,100, but again I think that first half of September was where you would really gone for some nice buy opportunities. Test cultures slowly working their way back to 8,000 disc here, so a bit of recovery here as well. 7,400 for the buyers. This is actually a real summer slump for test cultures here, touching 6,000 disc on a couple of occasions. Those were your buy opportunities. Now already on the recovery as well. And then we get wetware mainframes that is still trading below 2 million ISK. That's not that great, or creating an opportunity again. 2 million for the sellers, just below 2 million for the buyers. That margin is closing already as well, but you're still buying well below average at this point. And so yeah, the PI market I think is going to be a good gauge for just general activity, or maybe at least increased logins of players that at least play practically every day, because that's what I think PI is, or play on a set cycle and keep going. Next up, advanced moon materials. They are coming in at 3150. Let's take a look at that. I did read in one of the comments about the CSM minutes that nullsec very, very stale. Lots of blues and very little basically motivation to go for a big war, and I think structures are a big part of that. So as a result, stable nullsec. Let's see what the impact is on the advanced moon materials. We'll start with crystalline carbonites that are declining again in price. So here we had the nullsec blackout, very decent performance, bring the prices back to, I would call them an average price if you look at this 1-year chart for July, August and then September. But then right now actually at the latter half of September we're declining back to a less than average price. 146 now for the sellers, 145 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, but clearly the pressure is on from supply that's coming back online. Ferrite carbide, same September slump after I think the end of the nullsec blackout, and again trading below average. 140 for the sellers, 134 for the buyers. Average price around 137, 138. Clearly the decline here in September is very visible. Then we have our titanium carbide, which had a war spike in June actually, and is going back up in price here at the tail end. So it's not across the board. I think this could be tied to what's happening in a certain region, and it looks like titanium carbide is still not being supplied that much. 211 to 212 for the sellers, 205 for the buyers. That's nice. That's actually an above average price for titanium carbide. I would say if you manage to grab some really cheap titanium carbide, this is the right time to try and sell and take your profits. Tungsten carbide next. That pressure in September is visible once again. 200 on the average, and we are going back below that. 202 for the sellers, but 150.85 for the buyers. That is of course a bit of a margin opening up here. That's probably my brother on Steam who wants to play some Path of Exile. That's going to be after ETH Talk. Let's start with the photonic metamaterials. A very pronounced decline in September here again as well, going back below average 17.5k. I would call it 16.5 for the sellers, 16.2 for the buyers. So narrow margin, but on the decline, back below average. Plasmonic metamaterials, now same pattern right here again. Start off at a 1-year high point of 25,000 ISK, declines towards an average price at a frightening pace. 22,000 now for the sellers, 21,400 for the buyers. Again, the September decline, I would say on a renormalization, of course, of nullsec with local coming back, but also a further stabilization of the situation there. During the blackout, they were not going to go to war, but I think that was also because, well, they were kind of still thinking this might be a temporary thing, which the way CCP announced it and explained it, it could go either way, but there was definitely a strong possibility of it being a temporary thing. And so as a result, everybody was in a wait and see pattern. And now that the stability can really come back to nullsec, you start to see those supply chains come back online as well. Next up, we have maybe the Sino change could also be part of that, so that it takes a little bit of time for all the transport Sinos to move over to the new system, and so that we see more supplies at this point. But I think the nullsec situation is the real reason here. A bit of a decline, not as bad just yet. 26,700 is actually very respectable on the sell price, and we're staying above 25,000 with 25.8k on the buyers. That's actually an okay performance for the non-linear metamaterials, which I'm assuming is tied to titanium carbide in all likeliness. Yeah, so that one is still doing above average. And then terahertz metamaterials though had a high point just at the turn of August, September, and look at that decline back to the average price in absolutely no time. 23,000 for the sellers, 22,000 for the buyers. Pretty sharp decline here yet again. We still have some other materials to look at as well. Fermionic condensate staying below average. There's really not much to say here. Ferrogel, bit of pressure at the tail end, but still managing to trade at 48,600 for the sellers. That's above average. That's not a bad price, but look at this, 44,000 now for the buyers. That margin is opening up. I'm seeing the first sign of pressure here as well. Fullerenes actually going back down and staying below 1,000 ISK. Hypersynaptic fibers, all right, continuing to hover, but look at this again, these daily averages that go well towards those 12,000 ISK. I think that means that we're opening up margins again. Exactly, 13,800 for the sellers. Okay, that's definitely not bad, but the buyers are down to 12,150. So as a result, that margin is opening up, and there is pressure on the price. Nano transistors, right, one exception to the rule, still staying above 6,000 ISK on a lack of supply. 6,000 for the sellers, 5,500 for the buyers. Yeah, if you got some cheap ones lying around, a great time to sell. Then we've got the phenolic composites. Clearly the September pressure is on again here as well. Bring the price to average or just below average. Ceramic fibers again with the September pressure. So it is, in my opinion, pretty obvious that supplies are coming back online and that they are bringing pressure back to the price, and that in fact the market is very savvy about this, because what we're often seeing is 459 to 436. That's not that good as an example. But on at least some of them, on these declines, it is pretty obvious that the bottom is basically falling out of the buy prices, and that those margins are just opening up here. So yeah, the advanced move materials, that is the situation. In my opinion, if you still have stuff that is performing well, like the non-linear metamaterials, the titanium carbides, which one was it as well that was holding on to that 6,000 ISK? Right here, the nano transistors, this would be your time to sell, in my opinion. Next up, we have the Tech 2 ships coming in at 38.10. Let's take a look at those, and well, with a more stable supply of advanced materials, I think we should see more pressure on this as well. Let's take a look here. Aries still staying well below 30 million ISK. Bit of pressure at the tail end here. 29 million for the sellers, 25.7. Okay, I'd still call that, you know, not ready for a buy just yet. The Basilisk was under pressure last week. It's actually bouncing back from a 200 million high point on volume. So yeah, traders spotted the opportunity. Perhaps it's Eve Talk, perhaps they just, you know, watch that very closely, but it's pretty obvious that this decline has been taken advantage of and that they haven't overshot in their demand either. 221 now for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. Yeah, basically buyers have closed that gap, bringing the price and keeping the price below average. Cerberus was on the decline as well and is only now reaching that low point where it usually triggers trade actions, so that's interesting. 217 for the sellers, but 200 million for the buyers. If we try to get to 200 million, that's below the entire chart. Cerberus is in a buy opportunity. I'm very much expecting a Basilisk volume increase in the Cerberus by next week. Then we've got the Crow, that's actually declining here. Very nice volatility here in the Crow. Buy at 27, sell for 35, and now we are back down. 28.5 for the buyers, 26 million, 28.5 for the sellers. So the pressure is on, especially with 616 here, and then 26 million for the buyers. You are buying a pretty cheap Crows at the moment, but will this volatility maintain itself? That is, in my opinion, a lot less likely. The Guardian had a sharp decline and also had a bit of a bounce on not that big of a volume increase, so also a much narrower increase in price. I'd say the Basilisk probably jump back towards the 230 range if it were the same ship. 213 for the sellers, 194 still for the buyers, so that's still pretty low. If you try to get 195-ish going, yeah, you gotta go below the entire chart. So you're still buying very, very cheap Guardians at the moment. Then we've got the Heretic, slow decline, not yet a 1-year low point, but well below 70 million at this point, 60 million for the buyers. That is the lower end of the chart. Yeah, it is quite clear that we have pressure across the board in the Tech 2 ships, but something like this is very noticeable. Of course, Hounds declining to a 1-year low point, sellers are coming in at less than 25 million, buyers at less than 22 million, and that is where you could take a gamble. Stealth bombers still very popular in nullsec. If you want to disrupt, even in smaller engagements, they're pretty damn cool. Bombers bar is still around if I'm not mistaken, and yeah, they're the disruptive type of ships that still see activity even without a massive war. But if a massive war would happen, then you do have these spikes to 40 million is potentially. So this is incredible. 1-year low point for the Hound. I would definitely, I think I'll try to grab at least a couple at this price range, because this is showing on this chart that we have a nice opportunity here. The Ishtar, oh right, nice jump. Unexpected that there is this volatility, but look at that, 1-year low point or very close to it. We went below 200 million. It's good, get a volume increase, and the Ishtar is back at 257 for the sellers, 233 for the buyers. I did not expect this to happen again, but this makes the Ishtar kind of a weird one. With two massive opportunities, buy for less than 200 million, sell at 280 or at 250 in just the last 4 months. That's the volatility that we love in the Tech 2 ship market. I just did not expect it to happen to the Ishtar, but there you go. Sell opportunity if you grab some Ishtars below 200 million. Then we've got the Manticore, same decline as the Hound. That is very sharp as well. Sellers at 23, buyers at 19 million. That's probably the cheapest I've ever seen Manticores, or at least it's very close to that. And the volumes are already increasing. Okay, interesting. I'm not sure exactly what's happening in the stealth bomber market. It's not even on that big of a volume increase here on the sellers, so that's kind of a weird one. Perhaps someone knows something. That is something to keep in mind as well. Of course, CSM minutes have just come out. Perhaps someone spotted something. But this is very interesting, of course. Potentially, this is a huge trade. But if there is something else going on, be careful as well with this. So I would say, just again, don't buy 100 Manticores all of a sudden. Buy a couple. at least, you know, they're fun to fly as well, so that you don't overbuy all of a sudden. The Munin is going back above 280 million ISK, 284 and 255 for the buyers, a decent margin here. That's a surprisingly strong performer here. If I'm not mistaken, it is part of the meta in Nosik at the moment to have Munin fleets, and that's the reason why this one is up in price, well above average. Nemesis next, also declining to a 1-year low point. We're talking sellers at almost 25 million, but buyers at 20 million. Yeah, you could make yourself a nice little reserve of very cheap stealth bombers this week, it seems. The Oneros, yeah, just really don't like the volumes, managing to hold on to 200 million as well. So this one is just, yeah, a no for me. Then we got the Purifier. Let's see if it's happening here as well. Yes, it is. 1-year low point. 28 million for the sellers, 21 million for the buyers. Again, potentially a very nice opportunity, or is it that the market knows something I don't when it comes to the stealth bombers? Because that is surprisingly synchronic move to 1-year low point. I mean, you've got spikes across the board, but if we look at Purifier and then the Nemesis, you can see that it is quite different. And then you go Purifier again, so you get like an August spike, and then look at the Hound also. Yeah, also with the Hound. Oh, damn it. My point, where is my point here? Here we go. At least the Manticore is not showing that August spike, and then has actually a double spike in June and July. So they don't tend to move as uniformly as this. All stealth bombers down to 1-year low points, with basically the bottom falling out of the buy prices. Interesting. Next up, we've got the Saber, you know, Interdictor continuing to have a very hard time making a market. Whoops, that actually was not meant to move. I was meant to click on this one. 65.4 million for the sellers and less than 59 million for the buyers. Yeah, it's just not popular to be an interdictor at the moment. Scimitar dropping off sharply as well all of a sudden, managed to hold on to 250 for most of the summer, and now it is selling for 203 million ISK, buyers at 180. Let's see, 180 on the chart below everything. That's also a buy opportunity, and look at what happened to the Basilisk. It actually bounced up on increased volumes. The Guardian, slight bounce as well. So for that Scimitar, I do see this as an opportunity if you manage to grab some right now close to 180. And then finally we get the Stiletto that went to 1-year low point and actually bounced back to 30 million ISK. Is this the precursor of the stealth bombers? I'm not sure. It feels like it's a little bit different, but that's a crazy situation in the Tech 2 ship market, to be honest. Especially here, that Hound drop is significant. And then the Manticore, that is crazy. Buying Manticores for less than 20 million ISK is super, super cheap. Look at the average price, 30 to 35 million easily. Never seen that before. So yeah, definitely worth a trip, I think. Next up, we have the Tech 3 ship market. That's coming in at 46.30. Like that. Let's start as always with the destroyers. The Confessors shooting up in price. Is there something announced? Because if we see this across the board again, then that's definitely like a meta switch from stealth bombers to tactical destroyers or something like that. But that's a surprise one here as well. We had lots of stability last week across the board. Everyone was converging on 40 million in the tactical destroyer market, and all of a sudden we see the Confessor jump up to 45 million on the sellers. Buyers are not moving though, 36 million. So this could just be a volume spike, a buying of Confessors from a bigger group to create a fleet. Next up we get the Hecate. Alright, so it's not across the board, okay. This one is, you know, where it was evolving towards that 40 million ISK price range. 41 for the sellers, 36 for the buyers on quite high availability. Let's take a look at the availability of the Confessor. So they're already coming in right here, but basically that was drying up a little bit. Then we get the Jackdaw also landing at 40 million ISK. We're talking 40 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers, and here in the last 24 hours still a full front page, although the volumes are decreasing compared to what the Hecate is bringing in. So expect that price to actually move up a little bit in the upcoming weeks as production moves to the Confessor to take advantage of this spike, but I think it will be snagged, pushed down very quickly, as this is just like a big buy. I think that drove the price back up. And then finally we get the Zwepel that is going back down to less than 40 million ISK. 38 for the sellers, 35 for the buyers, and last 24 hours half a page. This is already drying up. This will continue. I think the Zwiebel will stabilize very quickly. Then the Jackdaw and the Hecate could go back up a little bit in price as production moves to the Confessor, but this is just basically feeling like a one-off. I think it will all stabilize very quickly. And then we've got the cruiser market, where we see continued declines in the Legion, going back to 150 million, 158 for the sellers, 137 for the buyers. Yeah, just not happening again. 137 is pretty much below the entire chart, and basically the way I see it is that this spike and this bubble here, whatever managed to be sold, it's these volumes times these prices, of course, it's just a relisting and is profit grabbed from whoever grabbed all the Legions and start relisting them at 190. So this is very artificial in my opinion, which is completely different from the Confessor spike here, which I don't think is speculation. I think it is more buying to use these destroyers. Next up we've got the Loki. Look at that, going down to 1 year low point again as well. 152 for the sellers, 132 for the buyers. At least availability is better than on the last bottom prices here. Let's take a look at availability for the Legion actually. That's definitely better as well. So I'm seeing less risk of manipulation on this decrease, and especially on this decrease. But that means if you want a cheap Loki, you can buy it right now. Proteus under pressure as well, of course, going from 160 down to less than 140, I think. Yeah, 140 for the sellers, 123 for the buyers. Look at the lack of buyers, that's pretty obvious. And here there's not that many Protei on the market. This could very easily get manipulated if they want to. 123 though, that's super low on the buy prices. And then we finally have the Tengu, that's also continuing to decrease back to 150. 152 for the sellers and 140 for the buyers. And again, look at the lack of buyers. Availability is also decreasing in the Tengu. The Tech 3 cruiser market is suffering. It's just not in the meta. I think it's a lot less popular than the destroyer market at the moment, for instance. And as a result, we have declining prices across the board. Low points in the Loki and the buyers of the Protei as well. This, let's see, Tengu buyers are at 140 million, and they're trying to defend a price range, but it's pretty damn low as well. So if you want a Tech 3 cruiser, honestly, Tengus, Lokis are incredible Tech 3 cruisers for the conduits as well, I think. So that is definitely an option, and it is pretty damn cheap at the moment. As volumes will then, I think, start to drop. So the Legion is still doing quite well. The Loki is doing quite well as well, but I think who is going to produce tactical destroyers at tactical cruisers at this point? I don't think a lot of them, let alone try to sell them in these conditions. So I think that what we will slowly start to see is volumes decrease, like what we're seeing for the least popular cruiser already, the Proteus. And then for the Tengu, yeah, it's also starting to decrease. And then you are again in that very dangerous spot where you get low prices, low availability, no demand. And that is, yeah, the perfect setup, of course, for a rich player to try and get another Legion bubble going, for instance. So this to me is feels a little bit surprising, but those volumes managed to maintain themselves quite well despite the relisting to 190. And so all of this is probably profit from the players that have done the manipulation in the Legion market. The Loki, you know, much less pronounced. Same with the Tengu. I think they're basically just a consequence of that market manipulation, but my read on this is that it was very successful. Everything below this part here is basically profit that they have managed to grab. Very impressive. And then finally we have our extra product this week. I am choosing the Marauders, coming in at 52.30, let's say. And it's just a personal interest. I am looking into other battleships to do the conduit scene, although the praxis is, I mean, it's perfect. It's got the staying power, it's got the passive shield, it's got the right weapon system. It is performing very well in my opinion, especially the region one. Haven't had to go out of one so far, so doing really well. But there are better battleships out there, of course. So let's take a quick look at what the prices are for the advanced battleships, the Marauders. Here's the Paladin. Tick 2 ship, of course, going for 1.6 billion-ish, 1.5 actually at the current prices. A little bit of a decline at the tail end. That's interesting. Yeah, and actually selling for less than 1.5 billion and close to 1.4 billion for the Paladin. Volumes are doing okay, around 10 a day. It looks like it's been able to maintain its volume range over the year, and 1.5 billion is actually right on the average for the year. So a bit of a decline at the tail end, and it looks like these were quite popular in the last couple of months here. Might just be because of all of the Triglavian activities, of course. Then we've got the Golem that's doing the exact opposite. Went down to 1.5 billion, which is a bit below average, and is actually jumping back up in the last week or so. 1.7 billion for the sellers, 1.5 billion for the buyers. Honestly, I think the Golem is an incredible PvE ship, if I'm not mistaken. Let's take a quick look at the traits here. Shield booster amount, target painter effectiveness. Then we get cruise missile and torpedo bonuses, and heavy missile roll bonus as well if you want to. Torpedo damage, gotta be crazy on this one. And cruise missile damage, tractor beams, micro jump drive, and then can fit the Bastion module. I've never flown a Marauder, and I think that's gonna be one of the next things to do as well. The Chronos holding on to 1.5 billion, just a touch above average, I would say. Yeah, just below that for the sellers. 1.3 billion for the buyers. Can you snag those? Sometimes you can. Look at that. Average price sometimes reaches that as well. And then we've got the Varger, which is actually declining in price and going below average. 1.34 billion for the sellers. 1.14 billion. So the cheapest Marauder is the Varger. Of course, I think the most expensive ones would be the Paladin and the Golem. Potentially the Chronos as well. It's a little bit less, yeah, but especially the Golem, because they are just that good at PvE. And if it would be my first taking a look at a Marauder, would probably be a Golem as well. So just not sure when I'm gonna buy it and when I'm gonna do that. It is of course completely out of range for an alpha clone to fly something like that, which at the moment has been the focus of the channel of my other videos. But across the board, this feels like it's average prices for these Marauders. We've seen in the Tech 2 ship market that there is a bit of pressure, and we're seeing that on the Paladin, we're seeing that on the Chronos, that's staying below here, and then especially on the Varger, we're seeing that pressure as well. I think the Golem is basically the exception to the rule because of its PvE niche, because of its missile capability, and as a result, that one is currently commanding a premium. And yeah, maybe it's even the conduits themselves that have driven the price up from 1.5 to 1.7 billion. You want an easier time in those do they have drones? In those conduits, yeah, even 75, which is perfect for all those smaller targets. With the 25 bandwidth, you get reserve, you get salvage drones. This is gonna do the exact same thing as the Praxis, but just better across the board, and as a result, it is commanding a premium on the price right now. Someone also, maybe I'll just take a quick look at that. It's not officially part of Eve Talk, but the suggestion was for me to take a look at the Vindicator with double webs for the conduits. So Vindicator is currently selling for 628 million ISK. That's like a third of to have a Marauder, and buying coming in at 557. It's actually at a 1-year high point right now. Normal trade 500 million ISK, so definitely pretty expensive. Slight volume uptick here as well. Is this also because of a PvE niche against the Triglavian Scout? It is possible, right? Lots of these tend to orbit you at like 6,000 meters, and so the Vindicator, let's take a quick look at the traits. Tracking bonus, stasis weapon fire effectiveness bonus, and then damage bonus to large hybrid turrets. Yeah, that's just going to grab that one Triglavian ship and then just blab it away because it's slowed down even better, and it's got great tracking as well normally. Something to work that I might take a look at as well. Quick look at the fitting. So we get quite a few. Good God, 2, 4, 6, 8 high slots. oof, that is indeed going to pack quite a punch. And 125 megabit. Okay, Vindicator it is. We're gonna take a look at that next. That's pretty amazing. And then, yeah, maybe the Marauders after that. Thank you very much for all of those suggestions. If you want me to take a look at something on EveTalk as the extra product, feel free to post that in the comments. I definitely try to take those recommendations as well. But that's gonna be it for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.